While Dad was fighting for his life in the ICU, Emily was standing under a bank camera, withdrawing cash, again and again. Inside St. Matthew's Medical Center, the air smelled like antiseptic, old coffee, and fear. The ICU hallway was too bright, too cold, too quiet in all the wrong ways. Machines breathed behind glass. Nurses moved quickly without ever seeming to run. Families sat in rows of plastic chairs waiting for updates that never came fast enough. Daniel sat outside room 312, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor tiles as if they might tell him something different from what the doctor had already said. Critical condition, internal bleeding. The next 12 hours mattered. Their father lay inside the room, swollen, pale, and almost unrecognizable under the lights. A ventilator pushed air into his lungs. Monitors drew green lines and turned his heartbeat into numbers. The man who used to build decks with his own hands and drive 3 hours just to fix Daniel's broken water heater now looked smaller than the hospital bed. Their aunt kept praying under her breath. Their cousin was calling relatives. Daniel could not think past the sound of the monitor. Beep, pause. Beep. At the far end of the hallway, Emily stood near a vending machine with her phone in her hand. Not crying, not calling anyone, not asking nurses questions, just staring at the screen and refreshing something over and over. Daniel noticed it, but at first he didn't think much of it. Emily had always been the organized one, the one with folders, passwords, insurance cards, the one who showed up to family crises already carrying a pen. When Dad was brought in by ambulance, Emily had been the first to grab his wallet from the kitchen counter. She took his phone charger, his insurance card, his overnight bag, and even the envelope where he kept copies of account information. At the time, it felt useful, responsible. Now, in the harsh white hallway, the memory landed differently. Daniel's phone vibrated. He looked down. A bank alert. Large cash withdrawal. He frowned. That was strange. The alert came from Dad's checking account, the main one. The account used for the mortgage, utilities, property tax, and almost everything else. Daniel only received alerts because Dad had added him years ago as a backup contact after a fraud scare. Daniel told himself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Emily needed cash for something urgent. Maybe the hospital required a deposit. Maybe she was handling some issue nobody else understood yet. Then the phone vibrated again. Another withdrawal, same amount, different ATM. His stomach tightened. He opened the app. The balance had dropped, not by a little, by enough to make his chest go cold. Across the hallway, Emily turned away and started walking toward the elevators. Daniel looked up. Her chair was empty before he had fully stood. The strange part was not that Emily had access. The strange part was that everyone had given it to her without even thinking. A few hours earlier, an ICU nurse had stepped out with a clipboard and a tired voice and asked the kind of question hospitals ask every day. If your father needs financial authorization for anything tonight, who handles that? No one answered immediately. Their aunt looked overwhelmed. Daniel was thinking about blood pressure numbers and surgical risks, not paperwork. Emily stepped in before the silence got awkward. I can handle it. The nurse nodded. Do you have access to his accounts and cards? Emily held up Dad's wallet. Yes. That was it. No debate, no suspicion, no second thought. Because that was how families worked until the exact moment they didn't. Dad trusted Emily. Everyone knew it. She paid bills for him sometimes when he traveled. She had helped him fix a problem with his online banking the year before. She knew the login. She knew which card was linked to which account. She knew his Social Security paperwork, his medication list, his insurance PIN, all the things adult children end up learning when a parent gets older. Daniel had never liked how much control she had, but he had never treated it like danger. Until now. He stood and called her. Once, no answer. Again, voicemail. His phone buzzed for the third time. Another withdrawal. Different location again. That was when the pattern became impossible to ignore. This wasn't one rushed transaction. It wasn't a panicked cash grab from the nearest machine. This was a route, a plan, a person moving across town with time, intention, and Dad's card in hand. Daniel walked to the window at the end of the hallway and called again. Still nothing. He looked down at the dark hospital parking lot. Emily's car was gone. Something sharp settled in his chest. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition. He went back to the family waiting area and told no one yet. He did not want to accuse his sister before he had proof. He did not want to say the words out loud while Dad was still breathing behind glass, but his hands were shaking now. And deep down, he already knew. The bank called before sunrise. Daniel stepped into the hallway to answer. "Mr. Mercer, we're seeing unusual activity on James Mercer's account. Multiple large ATM withdrawals in a short period." Daniel closed his eyes. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know. Do you want us to freeze the card?" He should have said yes immediately. Instead, he hesitated. Not because he wanted the withdrawals to continue, because freezing the card would turn suspicion into fact. "Yes," he said finally, "freeze it." The woman on the line paused. There were also attempts at additional withdrawals after the last approved transaction. That detail made something in him twist. Emily had not taken what she needed. She had kept going until the bank itself stopped her. He thanked the woman, ended the call, and stood still for a moment, staring at the closed ICU doors. A nurse stepped past him with medication cups. Somewhere, a child was crying in another wing. A janitor pushed a cart down the hall. Normal sounds, normal movement. Meanwhile, his sister had spent the night emptying Dad's account while Dad lay unconscious with tubes in his throat. Daniel went downstairs to get coffee and realized halfway there that he had no idea what day it was anymore. The lobby TV was on mute. Early morning anchors smiled through some local story no one in that hospital cared about. He checked the banking app again. The balance looked wrong. Not just low, violated. He scrolled the activity list. Withdrawals, transfers, ATM fees. More withdrawals. Then something else. An online transfer initiated just after midnight. His jaw tightened. This was bigger than cash. He called the bank back and asked for a full review. By noon, he was sitting in a glass office inside the branch while a fraud specialist turned a monitor toward him. "We pulled preliminary footage from some of the ATM locations," she said. "I'm sorry." The first clip loaded. Emily stepped into frame wearing the same dark jacket she had on at the hospital. No panic, no rush. She inserted the card, entered the PIN, and waited. Cash came out. She took it, counted it once, tucked it into her bag, and went back for more. The second clip showed another ATM, then another. In every video, she looked calm. That was the part Daniel would not forget. Not desperation, not grief, control. When the bank employee asked if he wanted to keep watching, Daniel shook his head. He had seen enough to know this was not a misunderstanding. This was betrayal with perfect posture. Back at the hospital, Daniel gathered the family in a consultation room because he could not say it in the hallway. The room had beige walls, stale air, and a fake landscape painting that made everything feel crueler somehow. Their aunt sat first. Their cousin leaned against the wall. A family friend from church stood near the door. Daniel placed his phone on the table and looked at each of them. Emily took money from Dad's account last night. Their aunt frowned immediately. For hospital bills. Daniel pressed play. The room went silent. The footage showed Emily at the ATM, then another clip, then another. Nobody said a word until the last video ended. Their aunt covered her mouth. Their cousin looked down and whispered no. Daniel opened the banking printout and spread the pages on the table. It wasn't just ATM withdrawals, he said. She moved money. She made transfers. She emptied the checking account. How much? The cousin asked. Daniel swallowed all of it. That was when the room broke. Not loudly, not like in movies. No one threw anything. No one screamed right away. The collapse came softer than that. Aunt Teresa sat back in the chair like her bones had given out. The church friend muttered, "Lord, help this family." Their cousin asked the question no one wanted answered. "Does your dad know?" Daniel looked toward the ICU through the wall, as if he could somehow see through concrete. Dad doesn't know anything right now. And that sentence made it worse, because now it was not just theft, it was timing. It was what Emily had chosen to do with the window created by his father's silence. Emily came back that afternoon. Not in tears, not wild-eyed, not acting like someone who had made a terrible mistake. She walked into the family waiting area carrying an iced coffee and her tote bag, dressed neatly, like she had stepped out to handle errands instead of draining her father's money while he lay unconscious. Every face turned toward her. She noticed immediately that something had changed. Daniel stood. "Where is it?" Emily stopped. "What?" "The money." Her eyes flicked once around the room, measuring the temperature. Then she set the coffee down. "I moved it," that was her answer. Not, "I can explain," not, "let's talk privately," not, "I panicked, I moved it." Aunt Teresa stood up so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "Emily, what have you done?" Emily looked at her with controlled irritation, like the problem here was everyone else being emotional. "I protected it." Daniel laughed once under his breath, a short, broken sound with no humor in it. "You protected it." "Yes." She folded her arms. "You were all falling apart. Someone had to think clearly." Daniel stared at her. "Dad was in surgery, and that changes what?" She shot back. "Bills still exist. Probate still exists. People still circle when they smell weakness." The room reacted all at once. "What are you talking about? That is his money. You had no right." Emily raised her voice for the first time. "I had every right to make sure it didn't disappear into chaos." Daniel stepped closer. "You mean disappear into us?" Emily held his gaze. "If Dad dies, everything gets split. Then people start making claims, loans, favors, promises. I wasn't going to let that happen." Aunt Teresa looked like she had been slapped. "You did this while your father was fighting for his life." Emily's face hardened. "Dad is not coming back to run anything." The room went still. That line landed heavier than the theft, because it revealed the part she had not bothered hiding anymore. She had already moved past fear, past hope, past loyalty. She was acting like the man in the ICU was already an estate. Daniel's voice dropped until it was almost quiet. "You looked at Dad on a ventilator and saw a deadline." Emily's jaw shifted, but she did not answer. That silence said more than anything else she could have said. What Daniel hated most was that part of Emily's logic sounded almost believable if you did not know her. She always wrapped selfishness in responsible language. Growing up, she never took the last slice of pizza. She saved it from going to waste. She never pushed people aside. She made efficient decisions. When their mother died, Emily took over everything for a few months and everyone thanked her for it. But later, Daniel realized she had also used that season to teach the family a dangerous habit. Let Emily handle it. Let Emily decide. Let Emily know best. Now the bill had come due. Daniel returned to the bank with copies of the transaction history and asked for a full freeze, a transfer trace, and anything else they could document. The branch manager was careful with every word. Because Emily had used valid credentials, this was not a simple outsider fraud case. It was messier than that. Family always was. By evening, Daniel learned the damage was worse than he thought. The checking account had been drained. A linked savings account had been closed. Funds had been moved into a new personal account under Emily's control before the freeze fully hit. It was methodical. She had not made emotional decisions. She had followed a sequence. Daniel sat in his car in the hospital garage for 10 minutes before going back upstairs. He gripped the steering wheel and tried not to picture Dad waking up to this. He tried not to imagine explaining that the daughter he trusted most had treated his ICU stay like an opportunity. When Daniel finally got back to the floor, a nurse met him near the doors. "Your father had some response," she said. Not fully awake, but he squeezed my hand when I said his name. Daniel's throat tightened. Dad was still there, still fighting, still, somehow, not gone, and Emily had already counted him out. The lawyer arrived the next morning. Not dramatically, no storm entrance, no raised voice. He simply walked into the waiting area in a charcoal suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase and the calm expression of a man who had spent his life delivering bad news with precise language. Daniel Mercer. Daniel stood. The man shook his hand. "Richard Halverson, your father asked me to be contacted if certain things happened." Emily, who had been sitting near the window, straightened. "What certain things?" Halverson looked at her only briefly. "Financial triggers." That phrase changed the air in the room. He set the briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside were folders, tabs, copies, and a sealed envelope with James Mercer's signature across the flap. Aunt Teresa whispered, "He prepared something." Halverson nodded. "Your father came to see me twice in the last 2 months. He was concerned about his health, and he was very clear that if he became incapacitated, he wanted oversight on several accounts." Emily's face lost a shade of color. Not much, just enough. Halverson laid out documents in a clean line. Mr. Mercer established alert thresholds, review conditions, and transfer restrictions on specific accounts. If large, unauthorized movements occurred during a period of medical incapacity, I was to be notified. Emily's voice sharpened. "Unauthorized. I had access. You had access," Halverson said evenly. "That is not the same as authority." Daniel almost closed his eyes from the force of that sentence. Halverson continued. "The account you withdrew from was a monitored operating account. It was intentionally left active. The primary reserve accounts were not linked in the way you appeared to have assumed." Emily stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," Halverson said, "that you did not reach the core assets." Silence, not relief exactly, but something close. Daniel felt tension leave his shoulders for the first time in 2 days. Emily did not. She looked from the documents to Daniel, then back to the lawyer. "That makes no sense. He never told me that." Halverson closed one folder and opened another. He was not required to. Then came the part that hurt more than the legal language. Halverson opened the sealed envelope. "This is not a will," he said. "This is a private letter your father asked me to read only if one of the review conditions was triggered." No one breathed. He unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakably Dad's. Strong, slightly slanted, written by a man who pressed hard enough to leave marks on the page below. Halverson read, "If you were hearing this, then someone I trusted chose my silence as their chance." Aunt Teresa started crying quietly. Daniel looked down. Halverson kept reading. I built every dollar in those accounts by hand and by time. If my children ever touch that money, I want it to happen in daylight, not in panic, not in greed, and not while I am laid out in a hospital bed. Emily's eyes did not move, but the muscles in her face did. Then the line that ended her. To the one who thought access meant ownership, you were trusted because you were loved. Do not confuse that with permission. No one said anything after that. There was nothing to add. Dad had seen enough before the ICU, before the surgery, before the machines, to know a line might be crossed, and he had prepared for it quietly. Not because he stopped loving Emily, because he understood her too well. Emily broke first, but not the way Daniel expected. She did not cry. She got angry. "This is insane," she said. "You're all acting like I robbed a stranger. I'm his daughter." "You used Dad's card while he was unconscious," Daniel said. "I protected this family from a mess." "No," Daniel said. "You protected yourself from sharing." Her voice rose. "You have no idea what happens when families smell money." Daniel stepped forward until there was only a few feet between them. "We are family." Emily laughed bitterly. "That's exactly why I moved it." Aunt Teresa flinched. Halverson did not interrupt. He just watched. Daniel kept his voice low. "You want the truth. The money is not even the worst part." Emily looked at him. "The worst part," he said, "is that while I was praying Dad would make it through the night, you were standing under fluorescent lights at an ATM deciding what our grief was worth." That hit her. Not enough to break her open, but enough to crack the shell. For the first time, Emily looked less certain than offended. Later that evening, Daniel was allowed into the ICU for a few minutes. Dad was still weak, still not fully awake, but his eyes opened once and tracked the room for a second before drifting. Daniel stood beside the bed and took his hand carefully around the IV lines. "Dad," he said quietly, "it's me." A slight squeeze, small, real. Daniel's throat burned. He did not tell him everything, not there, not yet. He just said the words he knew mattered. "You're still here." Another tiny squeeze. Outside the room, through the glass, Emily stood at the far end of the hall. Not allowed inside yet. Not after everything. Not after the family had made the quiet, brutal decision to keep her away until the lawyer sorted what came next. Daniel looked at her once, then back at Dad. That was the difference between them. Emily had looked at the same man and seen control slipping loose. Daniel looked at him and still saw his father. Bruised, broken, but still Dad. Over the next 2 days, the rest unfolded without spectacle. The bank documented every move. Halverson initiated the steps Dad had authorized. Emergency account protections became formal restrictions. Transferred funds were flagged. The family stopped speaking to Emily except through clipped practical sentences. No one needed more arguments. The facts were enough. She had not gotten all the money, but she had gotten enough to expose exactly who she was when no one could stop her. And maybe that was the trap all along. Not just financial, moral. Dad had not built a system merely to save dollars. He had built one to reveal character. The monitored account was bait, yes, but the real design was crueler and smarter than that. It forced a choice, wait or take, stand by the bed or head to the ATM, trust love or trust greed. Emily chose greed. No lawyer invented that. She supplied it herself. Dad began to stabilize by the end of the week. Not a miracle, not a movie scene, just one small improvement after another. Less sedation, better numbers, shorter ventilator support, a doctor finally using the word hopeful. The first time he was fully awake, Daniel was there, so was Halverson. Emily was not. Dad listened in silence as a lawyer explained the financial activity, the account protections, the triggered review, and the recovered funds still under hold. He did not interrupt once. When Halverson finished, Dad closed his eyes for a long moment. Then he opened them and asked only one question. Did she say why? Daniel could have answered in 100 ways. Because she thought you were dying. Because she wanted control. Because she thought being trusted meant she could take. But the cleanest answer was the truest one. She said she was protecting it, Daniel said. Dad stared at the blanket over his legs. A sad smile touched his mouth for less than a second. From who? No one had an answer to that. A week later, Emily came to the house to collect some boxes of her things. Aunt Teresa was inside. Daniel stood on the porch. Halverson had already advised everyone what to document and what not to say. Emily did not look defeated. She looked smaller, like certainty had been expensive. She carried one box to her car, then turned to Daniel. I didn't think he'd planned for something like that. Daniel leaned against the porch rail. He didn't plan for a stranger, he said. He planned for the person who knew where he kept everything. Emily said nothing, because that was the wound underneath all of it. Dad had known enough to prepare, not enough to stop loving her, but enough to protect himself from her. She got into the car without another word. Daniel watched her drive away down the same street where Dad used to wash his truck on Saturday mornings and wave at every neighbor like the whole block belonged to him. Then Daniel went back inside. Dad was sleeping in the recliner by the window, thinner now, slower now, but home. The house smelled like soup and pill bottles and clean laundry. Real life, damaged life, still life. Daniel stood there for a second and let the quiet settle. Emily thought she had won the night she emptied the account. She thought access was power. She thought Dad's silence meant opportunity. But the moment the lawyer walked into that waiting room, the truth became impossible to hide. She had not stolen everything. She had only exposed herself. And sometimes that costs more than money ever could.